Up in the clouds, 2 hours from Melbourne, is one of the Victorian government's most picturesque assets, but the Lake Mountain Alpine Resort is operating at a loss. Now the cash-strapped Allen government is looking to sell the operating rights to this resort and another at Mount Baw as a way of reining in its spending. But experts say even if it's able to sell the operating rights, it won't come close to putting a dent in the state's mountain of debt.
When you come to look at Victoria's public finances, the deterioration in those over the last 10 years is very much the result of conscious choices made by the Victorian government.
Back near sea level in a snap press conference yesterday, Victoria's long-serving numbers man Tim Pallas called time after 10 years as Treasurer.
There's no great time to leave the great honour that is high public office, but that time for me I think has come.
Under his tenure, Victoria has become the most indebted state or territory in the country, but the Treasurer was keen to deflect any criticism.
Our capacity to service debt becomes much easier as our economy grows.
Tim, is addressing the state's debt burden too big a task for you?
I think the clear demonstration is that the state's position is strong.
Economist Saul Estlake disagrees. Last week's mid-year budget outlook shows Victoria's debt as a percentage of gross state product is now at 24.2%, and net debt is now predicted to peak at $187.3 billion by 2028.
It has and is likely to continue to have amongst the highest debts relative to the size of the Victorian economy or to its own revenues of any state or territory in Australia. And as one of the rating agencies has pointed out this week, one of the highest levels of debt of any subnational government in any federation anywhere in the developed world.
Saul Estlake says financial support through one of the world's longest COVID lockdowns, the price tag of Victoria's Big Build infrastructure program and a massive public service are the big drivers of the state's debt burden. His assessment of Tim Pallas's fiscal management is far from rosy.
I think it has fallen short of optimal. I think that the Victorian government has taken on more debt than it should have.
You say you're addressing this debt issue, but there is widespread belief, and especially amongst economists, that you're not addressing it in any meaningful way, that the markets will recognise either.
Oh, well, everybody's entitled to their view. I think there are plenty of others who would express contrary views, but look, you're entitled now to eulogise and prognosticate about what you think I did.
On a day when the temperature was nudging 40 degrees, the outgoing Treasurer wasn't feeling the heat. He was upbeat about the growth of the Victorian economy.
When I became Treasurer, the size of the Victorian economy was about $400 billion. It will be close to $750 billion by the end of the forward estimates period.
The painful part of this debt for the government is servicing the interest on it. And obviously, the higher it goes, well, the more money it will need to meet the repayments.
It is approaching a point when, in the next 3 or 4 years, it'll be spending 8.5 cents of every dollar of revenue it collects from its own sources or from the Commonwealth on paying interest, and that's money that can't be spent on schools, hospitals, policing and other services that people expect their state governments to provide.
This debt issue, though, is this something that you've now kicked down the road for your colleagues to deal with?
Well, I think I made the point that we are growing, reducing the level of debt as a proportion of the economy.
Is the Premier's agenda in 2024 too expensive for Victoria?
Well, I would say that this Premier has demonstrated her capacity to balance what has been a very difficult strategy.
If and when the government gets on top of this debt, the questions will be, well, who paid for it and how much did it cost, both financially and politically? What about for consumers, customers who are shopping here today? How will this debt issue play out for them?
Well, ultimately, higher taxes on businesses are going to be passed on to consumers in one way or the other. A higher payroll tax will mean higher prices as businesses seek to recoup that loss, or fewer jobs hiring in the first place, which will ultimately mean more people unemployed.
Melbourne cafe owner Brad Johnston says he can't afford to pay much more. Would you be concerned if there were taxes on businesses to address that debt?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I would probably have to close my doors, to be honest, because there's not much more tax or extra payments that I can take.
As Treasurer, Tim Pallas oversaw surcharges to payroll and land taxes as a way to pay down COVID debt. Monash University economist Dr Zach Gross believes the state's economy is in better shape than the government's finances.
The average Victorian worker is now earning more than every other state bar Western Australia. And so that's a pretty good sign that the economy as a whole is going fairly well, and the average economic earnings for the average Victorian worker are still growing strongly, even if the state government is racking up a high amount of debt.
Over the past week, both the Treasurer and Premier have spruiked the government's new economic growth statement, which promises to slash red tape and regulation for business and boost investment. Is driving down the state's debt burden going to be the number one task for the next Treasurer?
The number one task for the current Treasurer, the next Treasurer, for me and every single member of my team is focused on listening to the Victorian community, understanding what's important for the Victorian community and acting accordingly and being driven by our values.
The state government's economic performance will be judged at a by-election in the Treasurer's seat of Werribee in Melbourne's West in the new year.